Here we go. First slide. Into the minds of brilliant researchers is our topic for today. And so that's what you see in front of you is our panel and moderators of beautiful, wonderful, brilliant researchers. And before we get into it, just a reminder, UXPA MN, we are on the social media channels and maybe more to come. We just sent out a survey. And I think one of the questions we asked about is what social media stuff you frequent. So whatever it is that you do, whatever you kids get up to these days, let us know. Who knows, maybe we'll try something new, but we're on most of the major ones right now. So you can find us and check us out. And be sure to go to our website, which you know about already, because that's probably how you signed up for this. The event calendar for 2022 is starting to fill up. We've got today, obviously, is the Brilliant Researchers panel, like I just said. April, we're going to have an accessibility focus and more information on that to come. Also pretty sure we know what's happening for the next few months, but just not quite ready to commit to that. So more coming really, really soon on May and June. July, of course, as always, our big summer social where we're hoping to get together in person and close to finding a venue, we think, for that as well. So we'll be trying to do that in person as long as everything is looking good again here this year. Good enough for those of us who are able to get together in person and celebrate, since we still, well, I'll speak for myself. I still don't have a lot of opportunities to do that. My business is just getting ready to reopen that office, and I'm dying to see people in person. So this will be a chance for those of us that are still mostly remote or fully remote. And then in August, we do know what's happening. It's an event about opening doors for a more diverse generation of UXers. So I'm really excited for that. That's enough, I think, about what's coming up. And I'm going to kick it back to Jason and Jalen, our wonderful program director and associate program director. If you do have ideas or want to volunteer yourself to talk at one of our events, I think we still got some flexibility there. We still got some openings. And we're also pretty soon going to be looking for people to speak at our World Usability Day at the end of the year. So it is not too soon to start thinking about whether you might want to do something for that. We don't even know what the topic is yet. I don't think they've announced it, but if it's something you want to do, get in touch. We'd love to talk with you and tell you more about what that would entail. And we would love for you to become a UXPA Minnesota member if you're not already. What that's going to get you is access to our members only Slack channel where we do all kinds of stuff. We post jobs, we share information, we talk about other cool events that are happening in addition to our own. You're also going to get discounted or free event admission to those things I mentioned earlier, the summer social, the World Usability Day. If we end up doing any workshops or other events outside of our regular monthly stuff, you'll be helped out there. But more importantly, you're going to just be connected with your local community of other UX practitioners, be listed and mentioned, and sometimes get discounts for other events. So check that out. It is a pretty reasonably priced $60 for professional or $30 for student. And that's a very broad definition of student. So if you're in college, if you're in high school, if you're in a boot camp, if you're doing anything, master's program, sure, you're a student, get your discount, come on in. We're happy to have you. And you can do that on our website. Thanks to our sponsors. We've got a lot of great sponsors helping us to make these events happen. I'm just going to read them all out loud because we're loud and proud. We're happy to have them here. Optum, Boston Scientific, Foundry, and Beacon Hill are our gold level sponsors coming in at the top level to support our programming and making great stuff for you all. And Securian Financial, last but not least, at the silver level, also pitching in. So with that, let's get on to the show. We want to welcome all of our brilliant panelists tonight. We have, in no particular order, but you can see their names there, so you know who's who as you're looking at the video. Shannon O'Brien, she's Senior Manager of Research at Thomson Reuters. Jen Teves, PhD, Director of XD Research at Best Buy. Melissa Hack, Senior Manager of Research at Zoro. And for moderators tonight, our very own Jason and Jalen. You know them, you love them. They're doing event stuff here and they're running this event. Jason is Senior UX Manager at Zoro and Jalen is the lead researcher at 3M. I shouldn't say the lead, probably one of some lead researchers, right? At 3M. And it's a small world. We were all just talking before this event about how we're all connected in different ways. we all worked with each other or related to someone we've worked with. It's very, very fun. So I'm going to hand it over to them so they can talk about research in user experience. Thank you all for being here, and hope you enjoy this event.
Thank you, Andy. Welcome, everybody. I just wanted to start by saying that we will be opening the program up for Q&A at the end. So if you have questions for our panels, please don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A feature of Zoom. And so I'm going to start with introductions. Our members would love to get to know you guys more. So please share more about your role, who you are, your role, and where you work. And one more important question is, are you hiring? Why don't we start with Melissa?
Oh boy. Hi, everyone. So I'm Melissa Hack. I'm Senior Manager of UX Research at Zoro. You've probably not heard of Zoro. Zoro's owned by Granger, we're a wholly owned subsidiary. And we sell a very wide mix of products to businesses. I've been at Zoro for 4 years. My background is in visual design, but went back to school to get a master's in HCI and pivoted into UX strategy and research. I'm very much hiring. We're hiring for many open roles, all levels of UX researcher and a research coordinator. And I'm happy to share details or answer any questions that anybody has.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. And the next person, I would like Jen to talk about who you are, your role, and are you hiring?
Hi, everybody. You can call me Jen. You pronounce my last name as Teves. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the director for XD research at Best Buy, specifically for both customer and employee experiences. Everything that you see on bestbuy.com, Best Buy app, and everything in between, you know, the home delivery, home services, and selling technologies, retail technologies, and people technologies that our own employees are using are included in the responsibilities of the researchers in my team, which is about 50 researchers strong. We are hiring. We do have open roles that are both contract positions and also full-time research positions, also both an individual contributor and leadership positions.
Awesome. Shannon.
Hello, everyone. Shannon O'Brien, Senior Manager of Infrastructure and Strategy in UX Research, and that's a new role that I'm in. So essentially leading the ops team to make our researcher lives easier. And then the strategic part, thinking of programs and rolling those out to really elevate the impact of research, which we'll probably cover more today. And I work at Thomson Reuters. So I've been there for about 13 and a half years and seen a lot of the evolution of the company and the impact and way of working from the UX team. Super exciting time to join us right now. We're really, we have a lot of roles that we're hiring for, and specifically in research, we have everything from UXR, senior UXR, leads, managers, and directors. So check us out.
Yeah. I do have to say that I'm currently working with Melissa, and I worked with Shannon and Jalen before when Jalen was reporting to Shannon. And I also heard about Jen through the grapevines. And this is such a brilliant, brilliant group of UX professional. And I'm so proud of this panel today. So excited for this. So the first question we have for you guys is, how did you get involved in a career in UX? And how did you land your first job as a researcher? Shannon, do you want to start?
Yeah, I started in math and computer science. Really didn't know anything about computer science. It just sounded cool, but I learned along the way. And I had a multidiscipline background, so I loved my psychology courses, my design courses, and I just magically came across HCI. I mean, I'm really just grateful that happened because yeah, I found it out, and then I went to write it from undergrad to grad school, got my master's in HCI. But with that master's, like my peers, some of them went into design and some into research, or some generalists, probably most of them generalists at that point in time. It was about 2005. I think I just always have loved studying people and just thinking, you know, that interaction with this piece of technology, whether it was a wearable or a software, and I guess I just gravitated towards that. And then your question around getting your first job, that's the hardest job you'll get, is that first one. And I think for me, it was actually overseas. So I worked for a year in Australia. So it was a contract position. And so at that point, you know, it was just like, whatever first job I get, I want to, you know, dive in. And it was an opportunity to do more of a research in this really cool space of sports over a distance. Anyway, so I've published some papers, but yes, that first job you get is the hardest one. So I'm always empathetic to that.
We definitely want to get back to that in a later question. Jen, why don't you tell us about how did you get involved in the career in UX?
Not very different from Shannon. So I'm a psychologist, a blue blood psychologist, if you may, from bachelor's to my master's up to PhD. I really want to study human behavior, but from the perspectives of making the world work around people and not making people fit for the world that is there as a default. So that's the entire difference, right? Like if the world was designed without the people in mind, we're always in constant battle with the systems and processes and services that are already there. But wouldn't it be nice if it was actually made for the people who are navigating around it, especially including those with disabilities. So my and how I got to the UX space, at the risk of dating myself, it's also around the time when it's HCI and human factors. You know, the term user experience is fairly recent, and so especially if you're dabbling within the realm of research, it was human factors for me, and it was through my graduate program, my PhD. We were working on consulting. One of my grants, the grants that I worked on were on unmanned aerial vehicles. So these are drones that the military was using. And so, you know, these are interfaces that ground pilots had to use. So the design of those things. Now, my very first job was through the internship that was required for the PhD program. So it was a year-long internship with Honeywell, which is based in Minnesota. That's actually why and how I found myself in this neighborhood, in this area. So it was, again, an internship that turned into a full-time job. It was a purely research job. It was around the time that Honeywell was evolving their design practices. So they had human factor scientists that are foundational to the team that they were originally building.
Awesome. Melissa?
Yeah, so I was actually working, I mentioned I'm a visual designer by original background. I got interested in UX and research I was working in an academic job with researchers, not specifically UX researchers, but it got me sort of interested in that process. And I think kind of similar to Shannon, I learned about UX sort of magically. I don't really remember how it happened, but I got very interested in it. And then I ended up going through the master's in HCI program at Depaul, which at the time when I started, I think it was late 2013, was kind of like, even though it was an HCI, it is an HCI program, it was kind of a little bit more UX oriented at that time. And it was actually pretty research heavy. So I ended up learning a lot of that process there, and didn't really intend to get into it, but that's kind of how I fell into it. And from after going through that graduate program, I ended up getting into UX strategy work and using research to inform the strategy. And that was kind of how I got more and more into it. And then just kind of like kept pivoting into different roles where I could do more of that because I really love it.
Awesome. So one of the next questions we have is about your day-to-day work. So we have a lot of people involved in UX. Maybe they do research from time to time, but we're curious about what does a fully dedicated research role look like? Melissa, you want to start for us?
Sure. I mean, I think my typical day is a little bit different just because I'm a manager. But so for me, it consists of a lot of meetings and interfacing with a lot of stakeholders and designers, or people that would report to me to do their research work, just working to define like appropriate approach, like I said, provide work review. I think as a dedicated researcher, you're in the weeds, all day and doing those different types of projects. Also lots of recruiting, at least that's what it kind of looks like at Zoro for us. And really like getting into the weeds with customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Shannon, how would you describe your role?
So I'll also answer from my specific role from the management. Right now, it's lots of fun things happening, of course. So in my role from the strategic side, what we're doing is really partnering with the other data and research functions at Thomson Reuters. So that being customer experience, they're collecting a lot of the attitudinal data points, those large scale surveys, NPS types of data. Product analytics, so they are looking at the usage analytics. And there's a lot of great publications out there, and we're inspired by that, of triangulating that data in different kinds of ways. So my day-to-day, like what I will just talk about today. So we had a meeting specifically with the head of product analytics, and then our product ops training crew and myself, because this is a new way of working. And so I'm really excited to be partnering with product ops to think about the training to roll that out to the organization, specifically with the product and design team members. So how do, for example, we're focusing on the training, essentially the life cycle of a study. So what does that building that learning backlog look like? How do we partner together? What's the RACI? Who owns what? But how do we partner? And then as that study unfolds and that, you're building your research roadmap and then you're executing, I think specifically that research roadmap, what we're doing that's different than what we've done in the past is we want to build a shared roadmap that includes, what's happening in market research, in CX, in UX research. So really building kind of that insights committee and building that transparency. And so I'm talking from the lens of a fairly large company and some activities that we're doing. But I think if you find yourself in a large company and you have these different functions, reach out and connect, because helping each other is just going to make that make your mission statement stronger of essentially data informed decisions for our product and design. So it's a little bit of my day.
Yeah, and that's great to hear about your roles as researchers more at that management level. A lot of people would like to hear about what advice you'd give to somebody who's trying to get into research for the first time. So Jen, what would you share with somebody who's interested in potentially moving into research?
I think one of the, contrary to like the assumptions, whenever people who don't know me would see my my background, educational background, I tend to get judged of being like very specific to like the type of education that an individual would have before they would be able to join my team. But it's actually the opposite of that. The first thing that I would be looking for an individual that would be joining the research team would be humility. So I think humility is that one of the key reasons for anyone to be successful as a researcher. Because if you already have all of the assumptions that you already know everything that you need to know, there's no excitement anymore to be a researcher, because that's where the beauty of discovery is, the beauty of gaining the knowledge, and the first one to know the specific insights for that specific research activity that you have led. But humility also would mean that the individual would have the best tendency to have a certain level of self-awareness. And when you have that level of self-awareness, it's not so hard for the leader that you would be reporting to actually grow you in that career. So when you receive a feedback from the members of your team or from the leader that you report to, a person with self-awareness is able to absorb that feedback and actually act on it for that individual to grow. So as you can see, right, it's not the criteria that I have is not it's not very such a high bar. And one of the key things that that I've tasked myself with when I joined Best Buy is really to put all of this talk about inclusion and diversity to actually be in practice and in action. So if we're really serious about translating inclusion and diversity and bring it into the practice of user experience, which is very critical because we're the ones designing products and services, is to lower the barrier and open doors to individuals that were not considered for these jobs before. So one way of doing that is to create positions where people who probably didn't have previous experiences, or that used to be the old school type of education that we're looking for, allow them to find a spot with the team. Allow for stretch assignments. So I've allowed for stretch assignments for individuals within the company to transition into the role. And then now a number of them have a job within the user experience, the UX research team. So, there's that, right? Like part of the day-to-day, to answer the previous question too, and part of like, what key characteristics or skills would you need to have. It's not that, it shouldn't be that hard, but it's really just like an ability to self-reflect, growth mindset, and actually actively like growing, have that learner's mindset, no matter where you are in your career.
Yeah, that's really awesome to hear. So that humility and that growth mindset is really what you're looking for. So I'm wondering from the other panelists, when you're actually looking to hire and meeting with people, what are some of the other things that you're looking for in candidates?
I think that tendency to be ability to be kind of quick and nimble in research, because that's oftentimes one of our biggest challenges of getting some data for the team to move forward with. So what kind of like scrappy ways have they done research in the past where there's always challenges, like whether it's recruiting or just, there's some sort of roadblock, and how have they moved around that? So that desire for impact.
Yeah, I would echo Shannon and Jen. I think those are both really great points and qualities. I think that I definitely don't look for a perfect resume. I am a career changer to a certain extent, so I definitely want to give people a chance to learn and give people with maybe non-traditional backgrounds, an opportunity to come in. I think that the types of work experiences that you highlight on your resume and in your interviews are important, even if they're not, directly transferable. I think that a lot of people get told to align their resume to the job, but I think that can be difficult and kind of impractical sometimes. It's better if you can just kind of like speak to how your experience is applicable. And I also think the types of questions that you ask in the interview to show your interest, Zoro is really big on that. When I interviewed here, everybody that I talked to was like, what questions do you have for me? And I think at the time I was a little thrown off because not all interviewers ask for that. But over time, I kind of got to see like, oh, that's a really good indicator of how interested you are and how much you've done a little bit of research on the place that you're trying to go.
Yeah, I remember Melissa was in my interview for my role, so I remember that.
Yep.
Yeah, so Shannon, you said earlier that you have empathy for folks seeking that first job in research, right? And Jen, you say that, you know, we have to open doors for folks without the necessary experience. So what advice do you guys have for aspiring researchers and what you wish you knew when you started?
Jen, do you want to go first?
I can. I want to, while I want to be very optimistic with and very idealistic in how we approach leadership and building the team and welcoming people within a team, I also want to answer that question with a very realistic answer. So the world is opening, and the old status quo standards on skills that are necessary have indeed changed, but there are also a lot of competition out there in the market. So it would not help to just rest on your laurels and and just depend on what you already have on paper and expect just to be handed that job. That's also like the beauty and the curse, if you may, of opening doors for everybody, because the ones who used to not be given a chance to even just interview can now compete for those positions against us. So you need to be prepared and do your homework. But the good thing is, part of the silver lining of the pandemic is all the education, all the information, and even mentorship from around the world is literally at the tip of our fingers and just across the screen from us. So find a really good mentor. If it's so hard for those who are starting in their careers, sometimes it gets daunting to know which are the right references to read, because there's so many, right, that you cannot possibly read everything. Maybe use your mentors, your peer groups to direct you to the right first set of reading materials or exercises you need to learn. And you do need to build that your knowledge base and even your practical experiences before you you approach the current job market. So yes, be brave because the world has changed and doors are more open now than they were. But also be prepared, like do your homework, take advantage of the information and of these resources that are available for all of us.
Yeah, really good point. I think to that, be prepared. One thing I would give myself advice back then is like research the company or the team that you're interviewing with. I think that shows, one, you'll get to know, is this the right fit for you, but also show a deeper interest so you can ask more maybe specific questions. That comes to mind. And it's a muscle, that interviewing skill. So, don't be daunted if expect to apply an interview multiple times and just look at it as that's a learning opportunity in and of itself. So don't get down on if you're not getting those jobs.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's some great advice for people getting into the research space. next we'd like to know kind of that trajectory. So once somebody decides to go down this research path, how do you build on your career, and what are your options as you advance in a research career? Melissa, will you share with us?
So I think trajectory is like, it's a little bit difficult to describe just because people's careers can take so many different shapes over time for a lot of different reasons. So some people choose to become leaders, some stay individual contributors, some go to kind of different niche industries, and while others stay like more on the beaten path. Some work in startups, some work in corporate environments. And I think each of these choices is going to some degree to change your trajectory. And I think the kind of the most important thing is just that you're doing something that you love and that matters to you, and that you feel proud of what you're doing. It could be, you know, a big project or a tiny project, but they all matter. And as long as you're happy with that, that's the thing that matters.
And this could be a difficult question to ask across companies, but when we're thinking about what an entry-level researcher does, what a mid, a senior, a lead, could you describe kind of what are those skill sets? What are the differences? How does somebody advance? What do they need to demonstrate?
I always think of like the scope of the impact. And so when you're in that UXR level, it's going to be very study centric. So you're going to be likely, like I used to be, I mean, I still am, excited about the methods, and you're really thinking about, okay, in this study, how am I best going to influence decisions at this point in time? And then as you move into a senior level, it's going to be much more around like maybe that roadmap or that program. And then lead, it might be across like customer segments or journeys. And so just that scope broadens. And I'd say also, obviously, your knowledge of research broadens. And so, for example, I think from a UXR, and probably speaking a lot from my own personal journey too, you're going to have maybe your tool set. You might be a lot of experience in that more directional, evaluative kinds of research. As you progress, one thing that we're really emphasizing to our more senior researchers is the ability to, make sure your roadmap has, yes, quick, impactful research, but also very foundational research. So it's really thinking of different ways to elevate your impact. So I guess scope of impact is the quick answer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And can you all speak to the role of a researcher in different settings? So obviously we have some corporate representation here, but can you speak to like what it would be like at a startup, maybe even agency, any differences there?
I can speak to agencies. I think that agencies tend to be focused on pitching work to clients, obviously. So they can, I think research can take a couple of different forms in that regard. There could actually be like a research project that you might end up doing for a client. But it could also be that you do some kind of like scrappy research to inform more of like a pitch that you would be giving to a client or to several clients. And the latter is more informing what you're trying to sell them. And it might be real or it might not be. And that is definitely something that you should consider if you're looking at agencies or maybe like some larger companies.
Jan, could you tell us more about how is it like in a really large team as well?
Yeah, so the trend right now is, product model is the new baby in town. Newer in some cases and more mature in other cases. So in a product model environment, you sit in your one of the for that however number of legged stool. So you sit side by side with your design counterparts, your product management counterparts, and your engineering counterparts. So very similar to what Shannon has mentioned, and the answer for this also kind of reinforces what Shannon has said on how people mature as people grow and move up in the career, in the UX research career ladder, is the type of responsibilities and type of research that an individual researcher conducts. But within the product space, think about the life cycle of a product, right? Before any product even come into fruition, there's that, there's the discovery phase, wherein that's where you would need to do foundational research, discovery research, you would do exploratory research. Sometimes that would involve some form of evaluative if there are some competitive experiences that you would want to be evaluating prior to anything created within the company that you belong to. But then as products and the features that fall under that gets built, then research would morph into like a more evaluative phase, because you're preparing for it to get deployed or released or launched. And then as it is launched and you want to give it the iterative growth that it deserves, then there's more evaluative research included into that, but also discovery for you to move it forward. So for teams, for research teams that are in-house within a large corporation, there's the uniqueness and the beauty of it too is, if you're the type of researcher who would want to see a product or an experience through, it's kind of like you're growing a plant. We have a plant theme going on today. So it's kind of like you're growing something and you see it from it being like this tiny idea without a name. And then all of a sudden, in the world of Best Buy, right? Like I've seen new researchers in the team, and, the joy in their eyes when they see something they work on as a page on e-commerce, or something that, the customers are talking about, or a part of the press release. As a leader, that's a joy to see, because you remember the first joy that you had yourself, right? So there's that uniqueness. But I was also fascinated with Melissa's response earlier, because that's also the world that I'm not quite that familiar with.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's a question on the Q&A that I think is very much related to this. So right now, a lot of our members are doing UI, UX, and research at the same time. So Paige Keen asked that right now, Paige is doing a lot of UI work with a little bit of UX research. So they would like to know, what kind of work do you guys do as sole UX researchers, so only in UXR? And I know that Melissa, you and I are dealing with a lot of that. So why don't you start for us?
So I think there's a wide variety of different things. So there's kind of generative and evaluative research studies that, at least on our team, we're looking to do, and we do already do. So on the design, more of the design side, we have designers doing evaluations of the designs that they create. So doing usability testing and validation. And then also there's, experience benchmarking studies. Those are some things that we're also looking into right now across our different product teams. I could go on for a very long time, and I don't want to list every conceivable activity. These are just some things that our team is currently working on. We're also doing some customer journey studies where we're looking at the different phases of the journey in particular experience areas. So we have product teams that span the whole customer journey, but each product team has like a particular a particular area, and we're kind of looking specifically into those individual areas. And so, I mean, those are some things that you might not have experienced doing UX and UI.
Yeah, very similar at Thomson Reuters. So we have dedicated researchers, and you mentioned generative and evaluative. We're using foundational, directional, so very similar. And so part of it, particularly, I suppose, if you're in a larger company and you're gonna have a lot of products, it's gonna be a larger portfolio. So part of it's understanding your current users. What are their pain points? What's working well and what's not, and bringing that data back. It's also research on what you're building. And so just like Jen mentioned, you have that product life cycle, the discovery, explore, test, and listen, which I love that Nielsen Norman article on that. So that those 4 phases, I mean, it's cyclical, it's constant. And there's just, when you look for it, there's data everywhere. And so it's making, focusing on what data to collect and making sense of it and telling that story.
We'd also like to know about mentorship, and if you have a mentor, the role that mentorship has played in your career. And I think this is a really interesting question for me, because we understand the importance of getting a mentor early in our career, but as you guys have advanced, how have mentors helped you along the way?
I can jump in if you may. I've certainly benefited from mentors, especially at the early stage of my career. Some of my mentors my mentors for over a decade now, are still my mentors, and the relationship has just evolved. So when as an intern, they were like mentoring me on the right methodology, the right theoretical framework that you would apply in your work. And as I've grown in my career, so that's my answer to your next question, to your follow-up to Jalen, was I still do have mentors until now, but it has evolved into maybe you can even call it the pure-blooded coaching. Folks might scream at me for using the term, but it kind of evolved into coaching now, when I would need some nudges for them onto like career decisions or considerations that I have, and the priorities that we have as professionals as we gain more experience and as we enter different stages of our lives, both professionally and personally. Priorities shift, right? Whereas before you didn't have children, or you were not married, or you live in a different part of the world, you're no longer a student, those priorities change. And sometimes as your life changes, you need people with experiences in those stages, so you have a little bit more leg up to make sure that you have a little bit more data point into making your decision. So the way I approach it is I actually have regular calls with them, sometimes very informal, because they have become like good friends and almost a family member, especially my close family are overseas. So these have grown to be like older brothers and older sisters for me, and so we just share. A lot of them have also grown in their career. A number are in C-suite now, and so the way that the advices and nudges that they can give me has also evolved, and I take advantage of that as them paving the road for me into achieving my goals too. And I'll close this answer by saying that there's also that aspect of giving back, right? So as we've received mentorship when we were growing in our career, there's also that sense of moral responsibility to give back and pass it on. And hopefully those who are getting those types of mentorship from me would also have that decency and responsibility to hand it back to the ones that would follow after us.
This is quite personal to me too. I share a lot of that sentiment, Jen. And also, you know, to get into the UX industry, there's a lot of barrier, and a lot of us who are like from an underrepresented background might not be able to like get connected and understand what we need to do in order to move to the next part of our career. So that giving back part is so important. Yeah. And so the next part that we would like to ask you guys is the trends in the industry. What trends do you guys see happening in UX research overall in 2022? Shannon, would you like to start for us?
I guess two things that come to mind are triangulating data. So I spoke about, you know, finding those data, other data and research teams at your place of work, or if you're in a smaller company, thinking of the data points that you can bring together. So that attitudinal data, that behavioral data, and then more of that qualitative data and making meaning of it. So that's a trend. And then another, I've been in conversations lately with other ops leaders, other companies, and you know, the democratization or non-democratization of research. And, you know, I think it's a different fit for different companies. And so for ours, we're really establishing research as owning research, and then but being really good partners and finding opportunities for design to partner with us. But that's going to be, it'll look different depending on where you work. And so it's just something to be aware and to make the right decision on what's the right fit for you.
Shannon, so triangulating the data, what are some sources? So other than your research team, who else do you tap to triangulate that data?
Product analytics. So any way that, if you don't have a team that's dedicated to that, any way that you're going to get that usage data, so that behavioral data, you know, that larger scale quantifiable data. And then attitudinal data. So for us, it's customer experience. And I've actually been inspired by a couple public papers, one from Zillow, one from Amazon, within the last couple of years that they've presented at conferences. And both of the papers are really on experience outcomes and then measuring your success against that. And so in a nutshell, it's really thinking about from your customer's perspective. They have their jobs that you're supporting. You know, whether that's needing to buy something or you're building a work tool, and that really is their job. What does success look like from their lens? What's that desired outcome? And then kind of working backwards and thinking about how are the ways that you can measure, did we support what success means from their lens? And that's where one way that we're triangulating our data from those different touch points. And also, in a nutshell, that if you can accomplish that, it's going to be really elevating those data points to be able to inform strategic decisions. Because if you can imagine identifying, hey, we're doing really well with supporting these outcomes, not so much here, that you can give that to you know, your strategy leaders, and they can say, well, let's focus on improving that. And you know, we talked a lot about scope of impact, and as you move from your career from UXR on up, and starting with, you know, your scope of impact is the study. You know, really think about like that scope of impact. Oh, my dad's calling. Sorry, Dad, I'm busy.
Working from home.
But that scope of impact is, you know, a lot of times I feel like as researchers, our data or even our research deliverable is so central to a team that needs it. If you think about making your data transparent and partnering as much as possible and making it visible, I mean, that's the only way you're going to be able to inform those strategic decisions. And I think I'm really inspired too by, you know, NPS from customer experience teams. they've done really well at making that such a focal point. So how can you do something kind of equivalent, but much more from a qualitative, what UX research can measure and show? Sorry, I'm excited about that question.
Yeah.
I love it. I also wanted to hear from other panelists. Jen, what do you think are the trends?
Yeah, so there's a lot, but one of the things that I want to highlight would be, a more proactive approach to doing research. And I would like to, since Shannon has articulated really well, my answer to that is very much like a connection to what Shannon has said. When a researcher or a research team is able to gain from the wealth of knowledge that's coming from other sources of information, then the research team would have the capability of being proactive with the type of research questions that needs to be answered within that space. So yes, we work hand in hand with our stakeholders like product teams, design teams, and our business partners. But it's also true that they might not be able to identify all of the potential questions, right? They have this certain level of space or altitude, what have you, or timeline that they're working within. And it's your responsibility as researchers to maybe kind of give them a nudge of like, hey, have we thought of this? The thing is, especially in the retail space where I am at right now, but I think the same is true in any other domain where it's a potential to be disrupted by every single Airbnbs and Uber and other what have you companies out there that are emerging. You always need to have an eye on potential for innovation. You don't want to just wake up one day and someone has run laps around you already. And the thing is, for those of us who are researchers who are in the call right now, or those who are interested to be in the research field, I think that's our unique contribution to user experience. To have that eye to be able to like study the world as is, but also to ask the questions that would allow us to design for the world that would be. And to correct for the things that need to be corrected right now. Proactive is also being courageous, because there are instances wherein like you would want to propose a proactive research. I'm not gonna deny you would have a lot of detractors, because there is a potential for not many people would see the value for asking those questions. But the courage to speak through, like doing your homework, so be able to articulate so people can understand, and be able to speak to the value of doing so, and using examples from practical examples from the world at large for what happened to companies that didn't have that proactive eye of their research team. Peloton is the most recent example, if you may.
That is so awesome. I want to come back to one of the things that Shannon mentioned earlier, which is the democratization of research. It's a long word. So in many orgs, we're moving away from that and getting research to own research and doing the proactive work to identify problems, right? Melissa, I know that you are standing up a centralized research org in Zoro. Would you be able to describe this process and this thinking?
Sure. So Shannon took the words out of my mouth. Definitely, depending on where you are, you're either moving towards democratization or you're moving away from it. We have a democratized model right now, and I want to make sure that I call out, we have many designers on our team who are doing really great customer research work. But there are some particular challenges with having the research spread across product teams completely. It kind of forces the design phase to be very, very long. And I think owning research means that we can kind of assess customer needs in a way where we decide the approach. and also the quality bar. So it kind of removes the need to force research into a corner a little bit that's driven by how much Scrum team capacity there is or how much investment a team might have in a particular solution. Because then when that happens, the research that you can do ends up coming from a very particular viewpoint, and it can get a little bit skewed. But of course, like product managers and product teams are going to always need to be primary stakeholders in the research that we do. But we can kind of take some of that, some of the bigger things out of that cycle, and take them on alongside and free up the team to do kind of lighter, leaner things. And then standing up a centralized team, there's a lot of work to do, and it's definitely difficult. It's gonna look different, I think, in every company. But for us, I think we're focusing on kind of templates, tools, and processes. So because we've been democratized and everybody's been able to do a little bit of everything, we're kind of pulling some of those things back a little bit, but also still making sure that designers who need to do some of that democratized research have like really solid templates in place and have a really solid process in place where they can reach out to researchers to get support. And then recruiting has been kind of a big time suck for us because we've had that kind of democratized as well. And so we're pulling that back a little bit and putting processes in place for that, just to make sure that we have the right people and creating reusable panels. And then, of course, doing lots of hiring, as we've talked about, staffing up the team. And then, of course, like spending time with stakeholders to understand what they want to learn, what their needs are from us, and then how they see themselves being involved and getting buy-in for the stuff that we do.
I'm wondering how the idea of a centralized research practice can also work with cross-functional teams, or what we might call pods. So a researcher working with a developer and a designer in a cross-functional way. How do you see those two ways of working coming together?
So I can speak for us. We're planning to have researchers not embedded, but dedicated, I guess, to different areas. So they're going to have particular people that they're going to be working with regularly, and kind of coming back to the same project areas. I think that it's going to require a lot of collaboration on everybody's part and kind of a little bit of flexibility, because, you know, there's going to be things that pop up, and there's going to be, for us, we have a lot of different team members, like different disciplines and different people involved. But that's kind of where we're starting from.
Mm-hmm.
I can speak quickly too on, so we just rolled out pods this past January, a couple months ago. We are centralized as a research team, but our researchers are, embedded on the pods, not from a reporting structure, but just, I guess I should take a step back. Like the pod has members of the different functions in the design org. So content, design, accessibility, and development and research. So the team, that pod team, is not a reporting structure, but it's a team. And then everyone reports to their function. So the function itself, like for research, we have from our ops standpoint, like the ways of working, the templates, process, tools, that our researchers in those dedicated situations are then going out and they're in a way where, we're elevating the leadership role that those individuals have, whether they are UXRs or senior UXRs. We're fortunate to be able to partner researchers so they can, they're not on islands. I think that's really important too.
Were there any other trends that we haven't touched on yet that you all wanted to share?
I think I can wrap there's two responses with a nice bow. And as you can probably conclude from from Shannon and Melissa's responses. There's no clear cut and one single right way to organize a UX research team. And it's a function of the organization that you belong to, how big the team is, the resources that's available for the team, but also longitudinally, it's also the sign of the times. When as technologies are evolving and the practices are changing, the world we live in also change. What works right now might not work down the road. So in a true research fashion, the way a research team should be built should also be ready to go back to the drawing board, evaluate if it doesn't work anymore, and then be courageous enough to admit that, oops, it doesn't work anymore. So it's time for us to rethink what we have. So again, it's even a theory can be proven wrong when new evidences come in. So, even the way we structure the team should be approached the way a research should be approached.
Thanks for that, Jen. So I was told that you were also recently part of a panel for a UX group in the Philippines. I'm wondering, can you share with us any differences or similarities you've identified with UX research practices in different parts of the world?
Yeah, I'm actually one of the founding members for User Experience Philippines. Like, it's over a decade old. It's about 5,000 members strong as of the moment, from in different countries around the world, and not just in Southeast Asia. So like everything else, a lot of practice, not just UX, have a very Western origin, sometimes US centric in a lot of cases. And so by virtue of that, the practice sometimes is it's in its childhood stage in other countries, but the uniqueness for it is it's growing up super fast. So the similarity is that it also has growing pains, the same way as what we have experienced here stateside. But the unique thing for them is they're experiencing it in a hyper phase of growth. So imagine your counterparts right now on that, across the world, like 13 hours ahead of you, would be asking this very same questions. I was in meeting with them this morning at 6 a.m. our time. And they're asking the very same questions, like, what are the skills that I need to do to gain if I want to be in UX research or in UX in general. So they're asking the same questions, but it's also with the world focusing on building it for the people that are actually going to use it, and not forcing people to just accept as things are. They also are addressing unique needs. Did you know that Uber had to leave Southeast Asia because the model didn't quite work? They didn't know the market. Southeast Asia has its own ride-sharing app that knew the market, knew the attitudes of Southeast Asians on credit cards and using cards. So they allowed for cash to be paid for shared rides. They didn't fight against taxi companies that were there, but they were friends with them and partners. And so those are examples, right, that you all would be in the same learning journey as they are. But I invite you to connect with your counterparts from around the world, because even the way you practice research would be enriched by connecting with them. A lot of them would be working with at much smaller companies and working on research with a lot of constraints. Constraints does breed a lot of innovation. And so when they make it work with like less of the things that we have here. Now you know that there's a brilliant researcher there. So there's a lot to be learned from those individuals as well, no matter where they are in the level of their career.
This is so inspiring for me, and I came from Vietnam, so now it's giving me ideas, Jen, to connect to the UX community in Vietnam. I'm sure there's a thriving community there. This is awesome. So on this trends topic, so accessibility now further has become the expectation, right? Companies no longer design for the visible customers only. So how do you make sure your team of researchers understand accessibility and have it in mind and act without bias? Shannon, you want to take this?
So we are fortunate to also have an accessibility team. And so it is definitely something that we want to make sure we're partnering closely with them. And I think there's an idea that we would even have them lead some of the studies to learn from, the logistics of it. So in general, I think as we think of who we're recruiting for our research studies, to make sure that it's representative of the population, and that just naturally includes people that have accessibility needs. We haven't always done a good job from a research standpoint of that because, I guess we're probably daunted by the maybe technological constraints, but that shouldn't be an excuse. So it's thinking about, okay, what's the best methods? I guess the first step was, what's the best methods that, aren't going to have that technological constraint, and then just making sure it happens. But in short, I'm really happy that we can partner with accessibility that has that expertise.
If you would allow me to jump in, and Shannon, I would love to have a discussion with you on that, because I'm excited to hear that you're growing that practice in your end too. We have started building the accessibility team at Best Buy. Back in my time at Target, we have a very mature accessibility team that's working with design and research. So at Best Buy right now, I built the accessibility research strategy with the leader on the accessibility side. The way it works is they no longer just sit on the QA portion. They no longer just to avoid for us getting sued space, but it's really like building accessibility at the very beginning of the design process. So what that means is the accessibility professionals work hand in hand with the researchers in my team. So they work from the start of the research planning phase. They work hand in hand in identifying who to recruit when it comes to research, and also including to how would you design your methodology so you actually give an equal footing for any type of participants of differing disability that would join the study. So a practical example for that is say if the design or the stimuli that you're testing or asking feedback on are visual stimuli, then that's not really a level playing field for someone who cannot see, right? So the research itself has to evolve if we're gonna do a research practice that would include everybody. And so one of the very first thing that I've done at Best Buy was to specifically ask that. And I think this would also answer the question from Jamie that's on the chat right now, right? How would we build inclusion and anti-racism in our research practice? And this is not exact science. I would for those of you statisticians out there, don't fault me that this is not a representative of X population. But when we want to effect change, you want to make it with less in the path of less resistance as possible. And once you cross that bridge, then you do put the details. So we would be starting with no view for inclusion and diversity at all. So I've started it out with every single research that comes out of my team would have to have 50% of BIPOC representation for its sample of participants. So Black, Indigenous, people of color, Latinx, multiracial representation should be there. Because otherwise, how would we face the public and say that we are representing the actual world that are using our product if we don't have that in the first place? The second thing that I'm requiring the researchers in my team is at least 20% of their participants, and these are, qualitative studies, very small sample sizes, but at least 20% of that would be people with disabilities. And so the next question they asked me, because they're brilliant individuals, was what types of disabilities? There's so many. You cannot possibly, if you keep on asking that question and let that stop you, then we never cross that bridge. So my answer for them is, what would be the disability that is relevant for that specific experience? So for example, if it's a web, if it's a digital interface, then perhaps sight, visual limitations or dexterity issues would be the most relevant. And I would love to be corrected if I'm wrong. But then if you're looking at physical spaces, right, like in retail stores, perhaps mobility disorders, those who are using mobility chairs, wheelchairs, would be the most likely candidate, because they would be the ones who would have the most difficulties if you don't try to ask their feedback for those specific experiences. So those are like some of the ways, right? In a lot of cases, in the talk of inclusion and anti-racism, it's never going to happen by accident. It has to be intentional. And also, your team also has to reflect the research that you're trying to conduct, and has to reflect the world in which your team is operating on. And so to answer Jamie's question, right, how would you have done, build inclusion and anti-racism? My team is a reflection of the world with which we live in. And it's not just representation of minorities on specific levels, but all throughout. In more junior researchers, in leadership positions, and in lead positions, there would always be that because we all of us have blind spots. And so if we invite different backgrounds in the team, then each blind spot would start to be cleared. And so I hope, and the last thing that I would want to say is, it's not that we are limiting the size of the pie for everybody when we talk about including others, but really we have the power to make the pie bigger, to share it with everyone.
I love that analogy. You're making the pie bigger, or you're offering the pies to other folks as well. And now everybody have pies, which is great. One thing that you were saying is that we have to consider it in every situation, right? So I know, Melissa, you are starting a practice. So can you let us know how diversity, inclusion, and accessibility is applied in a smaller team?
So I'll be the first to say that I have still a lot to learn here, and that we don't do this as well as we could right now at all. We've tried to, make considerations in some smaller ways, and we have plans to do this in bigger ways over the course of the coming year. We've tried to, I'd say, like we've tried to not reinforce some of the stereotypes that our stakeholders and the business overall they obviously hold. So when we've created personas, we've given them gender neutral names. We don't specify images. For surveys, we let people self-select their ethnicity and gender without making assumptions. And this is like an ongoing area that we can continue to build on. We still have a lot of work to do in the area of recruiting, because we're B2B and because we're mostly doing digital research. We tend to use a lot of panels, and panels can kind of narrowly self-select for people who are, maybe they work at a desk all day. So that can be really a kind of narrowing thing. We also tend to recruit during the day, and we should probably be doing some research, on off hours so that we can include people who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to do that. So we've got some goals that we're working towards on that. We're working on figuring out how we're going to do that much better.
That's a great suggestion. What I'm going to take right away is offering participating in research outside of our normal 9-to-5 working hours. That's a great point. So we have tons of questions for you all. I hope we can get to many of them. So one that I picked out that I really liked, are there any skills that you wish more researchers had leveled up? What are some of the things that experienced researchers do that make you say, I would love working with them?
Storytelling comes to mind. The ability to, not getting too deep into the weeds, but just tell that story of like, what did you do? How'd you approach it? What was the impact? And then writing. So we are also moving a little bit of away from like a PowerPoint culture to a writing culture. So we have a lot more Word docs, but those Word documents need to be very, concise and succinct. And so it's writing for action. So I think as researchers, oftentimes our deliverables might be, I kind of think of it like giving the kitchen sink. And there's definitely points in time where you might need to do that. But when it comes to creating a deliverable that you have a meeting and talk about next steps, really think about like, how are you going to craft and write those insights so that they do foster that action? And it's not, I guess historically I've seen in probably my own reports, it's almost like going through a gallery at a museum and you're just like consuming all this information and it's like really great. And you're like, oh, that was beautiful. But now we want to evolve from that. And yeah, that's great for a lunch and learn. But when we have meetings where we can just have this real clarity of thought in a written format, we can read that and we can talk about those next steps. I think it's really pushing ourselves to write in a clear, concise way in those insights. I did not come up with this formula, but I love this formula of it's ideal but tension. So what's the ideal, but what got in the person's way? So it's less of like insight from something you observed. Like you wouldn't say, oh, people walk on the sidewalk. Like, good. What should we do about that? But people want to walk on the sidewalk, but there's a pothole. Okay, great. Now I know there's a problem to be solved. So I think that's a skill that does take a lot of time to, there's something to focus on.
We have a lot of questions about transitioning into UX in the Q&A. So one question is about what investment that our members should do, like boot camps, certificates, or courses. What would you guys recommend?
I think it really depends on your background and what kind of experience you already have. It's hard to say. So for me, like when I went into the HCI program, I had a design background, but there were a lot of people who didn't have that. And it didn't teach a whole lot of it. It taught more research than design. But I think I kind of had a leg up because I had the design background, whereas a lot of people who came in didn't have that. So I think it's kind of about like understanding the program that you're looking at or the various programs and what they're going to give you and kind of how it's going to complement what you've already got and maybe fill in some of those gaps.
Okay, so I'm going to read a specific question that was submitted, but I'm going to frame it a little bit. So throughout the questions, there's many about, we've talked about formative, generative, evaluative, very like impact research that's impactful at different levels. So we have a lot of questions about kind of defining those different types of research. And then this all comes back to what's the ideal ratio. So if we talk about generative versus evaluative, what would be the ideal ratio for a research team to be conducting?
I'll attempt at that question. It's a really good question. I don't have the magic ratio, but I'd love to know that one. I'd love to know the answer. I just wrote up some thoughts the other day on research roadmaps, and think about creating them that are strategic, fast, and flexible. So from a strategic, I like to think of swim lanes. So your roadmap has a couple swim lanes, and so from the strategic standpoint, whether you're using the foundational, that's foundational or generative or discovery, like that's all that it describes the types of research that you do to inform what's the solution. So that point from what are we doing to, okay, we're going to narrow into a solution. And so that's the strategic part. And then your roadmap has, okay, now that we've narrowed on a solution, we're going to iterate on that. We're going to improve that. So that's what we would call directional. It's also evaluative. So you have that swim lane, and that's your fast. You want to make sure when you are doing research that's evaluative, usability tests and whatnot, it's fast because you're oftentimes going to be supporting teams that are in a sprint cycle. And then flexible. So when you think about your roadmaps, I don't have the magic answer, but it might make sense to be quarterly, a couple months, definitely not a year. I mean, maybe you have like a fuzzy one for the year, but you got to be flexible because it's going to be dependent on what you're learning, and did you have to make any pivots along the way?
That's awesome. There is a related question on topic of that about how UX is working within the organization from Nate. Who are other great partners for research in your orgs? Do you have any friction as your org matures and grows against theirs? Thinking upstream marketers, business intelligence, etc. Jen, why don't you take it away?
So the good partners and like friction and all that, right? So I think it all depends on how you try to educate those different groups within the company on your role, on the role of your team. Compared to other groups in the organization, UX and UX research really, it's kind of like the baby. It's like the new kid on the block that people don't understand. And when you come in the place of less amount of understanding, unfortunately, sometimes it could come in as a threat, but it doesn't have to be so. And so the attitude or the approach that a researcher or a research leader should have is to educate. That's one of the key responsibilities that we have. That remember the pie earlier, there's enough pie to go around everyone. So the way I explain it to the best partners for me would be the other research organization, and as Shannon has been saying earlier, right? Like we are actually consumers of the data that other research team and data analytics teams are collecting, because having access to those data would actually allow us to be more strategic and more efficient in how we approach the UX research that we do as a team. So it's a matter of explaining to them that, hey, we are a research team too, but we are operating at this level of altitude. We need you for so and so. We need you for the findings that you have. We use your output for these things to do our own research. And then for us to be able to execute the research that we do for our team. So in terms of frictions, sometimes for teams who also don't understand just research in general, it can be seen as the thing that would slow them down, and the thing that would spend their money, that would waste their money for nothing. And so that's where we again learn to educate, but also be more flexible. And that's where we have to emphasize like continuous learning, because once as new tools have emerged, and new methods and creativity and methods can be applied, research can be more efficient and could potentially run faster and less expensive for the team. However, you also have to be able to learn to explain that you also don't compromise the quality of research just for the argument of making it fast. So again, that's where friction could come in, when those things do not align. But take courage to explain that. And there's just that. I think there's just that tipping point to when the relationship would even out at some point. And hopefully we all see it.
So we have time for just one more question. A lot of people want to know from you all, what are your best practices for staying educated, up to date on things that are changing? So any resources about privacy laws, methods, new technologies? We'd love to hear from you all.
For sorry.
I love all the articles I see like on LinkedIn, so I must have connected to the right people. So I have to check my LinkedIn feed, and then Medium. I've subscribed to a couple different areas, so that goes to my Gmail account, and I can peruse that. Sorry, it's been so awesome that we have a community, globally that is passionate about writing about UX, and someday I'll write something too, but thank you everyone for writing something for me to consume.
For education, I'm a nerd. I guess I could not hide that anymore. And as a leader, that's actually one of the things that I do on a day-to-day basis, is to educate myself and to educate the members of my team. Right now at Best Buy, we have our internal research university, just for the research team. It is because it's a team of passionate learners and also passionate teachers. So we thought like this is a very good environment to grow those two types of passion. So we have a curriculum that's built by the researchers for researchers. So they teach each other. It's just once a month type of thing. Sometimes we skip it because I don't want it to be a source of stress for them, but more on like something that would fuel their motivation. So things like, as I think it was Shannon who mentioned, like storytelling. There are instances where they're learning metrics as of the moment. Some of us have strengths on quantitative, and while others are on qual. So those ones with strengths are teaching the others who need to grow in those skill sets. So in this sense, I keep on telling the members of my team is that really one of the job of a leader, and here is where my responsibility differs a little bit from Shannon and Melissa, because I lead a slightly bigger team than they do. The ones who are reporting to me are the senior managers. And so the job of a director, at least from my perspective, is that you need to remove the barriers for the team and to grow the team and to challenge the practice. How would you evolve the practice and build expertise within the team? And so in a very Asian manner too, I'll copy John Maida in saying that the job of a leader is to make everyone reporting to you so good that they can also beat you when the time comes. And so it's the strength of you feel pride as a leader even when they do leave you in the end. But when you see that they become poachable by other places, they get offered a higher position elsewhere, you kind of know that you've done your job, right? It means that they've learned that skill by working within the team that you lead.
I have to say that I follow Jen on LinkedIn and a lot of articles and posts that she shares is amazing. So Shannon, that advice is so good. And that's how we got connected. And that's why we I found you guys here as a panel. So we are at time. This has been so amazing. Thank you guys so much. And I know that our members have a lot of other questions, so we will try to get to it after this event. Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And thank you again so much to our panelists. Really amazing insights here. I think really underscoring all the different approaches to research, the different paths to getting in to a research job, and all that just underscores the importance of diversity. I think we heard over and over again. Also, I'm kind of hungry for pie for some reason. So it's about time to wrap this up. Again, we'll be sharing out the recording to this, so look for that in the next day or two to come to your email if you've registered. Well, thanks for all the great questions, and we did not have time to answer them. I will just, panelists, before you go away, just quickly around the horn, don't feel pressured, but please let us know if you're willing to have people reach out to you or connect with you on LinkedIn, and maybe ask some of those questions that we didn't have time to get to. But other than that, yeah, Melissa, go ahead.
Oh, I said, yeah, absolutely. Reach out to me. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you have other questions or if you're interested in any of the open positions.
Great, thank you. I saw Jen saying, go ahead and hit her up in the chat. LinkedIn, she's open. Shannon, what about you?
And follow Jen on LinkedIn.
Yeah, definitely open. I have someone who's getting tired, so.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks again to everyone joining us tonight. Have a great rest of your month. We'll look to see you again next time. Goodbye for now.
Thanks for having us. Nice to meet you, Shannon and Melissa.
Thank you so much.